My name is Jeff Hanley. I was the Constellation Program Manager from 2005 to 2010. ARES 1 flowed out of conversations we were having with primarily the ATK prime contractor for the first stage, as we were looking at concepts for early flight testing opportunities in the program. This was in 2006. We started looking at concepts for doing a 1X-like demonstration flight. Really it was intended to get at, from a technical perspective, the perceived risk of the controllability of this stack with a solid first stage and a liquid upper stage. While all the design studies we had done showed that there was good control margin with respect to the guidance system's ability to control the integrated vehicle, there was still considered to be some uncertainties, and so that was attractive to us. An early flight test opportunity was attractive to us from teaching the team how to produce a flight system and get it to the pad and launch it, process it, and manage it. All of those things were attractive to us, and really senior management, and I would say, and I would include in that not only my boss, Doc Horowitz at the time, but also Dr. Griffin, really saw the value from a team perspective of getting an early flight test success in the program, and that was essentially its genesis. We then went into conceptual studies on, okay, what would this flight test really look like, and things moved along from there pretty steadily. From the early on, the senior management was very supportive of doing such a flight test in the early part of the program. So we had the mainline program, correct? I mean the ARES 1, what became the ARES 1 Orion product lines that we were trying to complete formulation on. And by that I mean figure out what were those real designs going to look like for the spacecraft and the rocket. We were also had a part of our program team working on the phase beyond that initial capability, so that was the lunar return phase of the program, trying to get something going on defining what the landers would look like, what the Ares 5 heavy lift rocket would look like, so that we would be making good informed decisions in those early years that would play as strongly as possible toward those exploration outcomes early on. So we had the primary program team, and which was even then a multi center team staffed from Johnson, Kennedy, Marshall, Langley, Glenn, Ames, JPL. Every center was really represented just about on the program team. And because we had the mainline team focused on that early formulation activity, basically trying to get to PDR for ARES 1 and Orion, we understood that we needed to really be successful with 1X, we needed to stand up a leaner, small team, much smaller than the full program team, to really work in parallel, so that we could really make this early flight test happen, but yet not have it sideline or derail the mainline activity of formulating ARES 1 and Orion. By formulating, I mean getting those through the conceptual design phase and preliminary design phase, and get through PDR on ARES 1 and Orion in parallel with actually developing a flight test. And it was only a couple months before ARES 1X flew that we completed the PDR for the Orion spacecraft. So because of the need to have a sort of a parallel activity, and the talent base at the main three centers, the human spaceflight centers, Marshall, Johnson, and Kennedy, were pretty subscribed with not only constellation formulation but shuttle program, station. We looked to our sister centers, Glenn and Langley, for a much more substantial role in the ARES 1X effort, and so we ended up. I assigned a mission manager, Bob S., and with his with his small team that he put together, really brought together a multi-center team to really get ARES 1X on the track it needed to go. The first year, I'd say from 2006 until early 2007, the ARES 1X formulation effort kind of struggled a little bit in the shadow of the mainline program. And it was really only after I had asked the at the time deputy project manager for ARES, Dan Dumbacher, to do a lean event, if you will, a Lean Six Sigma activity, to look at how we were working together to make ARES 1X happen, and recommend to me changes in management structure, change in perhaps an acquisition strategy for the various elements of ARES 1X. And when his team reported out to me, I believe it was in the spring of 2007, it made it pretty clear that we needed to stand up a truly independent team, and I needed to give them the freedom to move as rapidly as they possibly could. And in other words, empowering, putting Bob S. in the leadership position and empowering him to make decisions at his level without a tremendous amount of care and feeding, if you will, of the mainline program. And that's essentially what we did. I think my entire management team understood the message that Dan Dumbacher's Lean Six Sigma team was trying to give us, which was that if you want to make this happen, you're going to have to let go. The mainline team was going to have to let go of ownership for ARES 1X, and we had to stand up this small independent team and move. And that's from spring of 2007 onward. That is the construct under which ARES 1X was managed. Bob S. put together his mission management office. He set up his IPTs, and he did essentially something not too afield from a skunk works, but not exactly what you would consider a skunk works, because there was no co-location. We had an agency-wide team, people from Dryden, people from Langley, people from Glenn, people from Kennedy, Marshall, a few folks from JSC, all engaged in this virtual collaboration on ARES 1X, and that's really the way it was executed. Picking the right team for ARES 1X. Well, I think it begins with the leadership position, the mission manager. It is of course influenced by the talent that's available. Particularly in human spaceflight. We had two other programs, full programs still executing, shuttle and station, and so we looked more broadly across the agency, consulted with the center leaderships at some of these other centers, Langley and Glenn in particular. Those centers brought forward their very best folks that they had to offer. We consulted with the NESC, Ralph Rowe and his team, on possible participants, people that they could bring, talent they could bring to the table. But I think it began with putting the right person in place as the mission manager, Bob S. in this case. And Bob had been somewhat already within the context of the mainline program, sort of the spiritual leader of ARES 1X. But I had not installed in him full authority for all decisions related to ARES 1X. It was still sort of a collaborative thing that we hadn't really established a clear decision authority for up to that spring of 2007 Lean Six Sigma outbrief by Dan Dumbacher and his team. And so one of the clear recommendations from their team is that we establish somebody to be the clear decision authority for ARES 1X, and that the consensus was that Bob be that person. That was one of the critical aspects for me in terms of Bob himself proving to be the right person, was his stated willingness to relocate. Bob understood that he needed to be close to wherever the systems engineering and integration function would be managed, because that's how it's all brought together. The SE&IP element. That was a separate IPT within Bob's flat IPT structure, but in terms of integrating and executing the leadership of the SE&I team, it was pivotal to bringing the product together and getting it flown. So Bob needed to be co-located. He concluded that he needed to be co-located with whomever or wherever the SE&I leadership resided, and so he was willing to relocate to Langley for the first year and a half until hardware started showing up at the Kennedy Space Center, and then Bob relocated to Florida for I think the better part of a year. And that level of commitment and focus, I think, was one of the, in a lot of respects, Bob led by example. And the example, what better example can you, in terms of commitment, can you be than to go to where the centroid of the work is? And so that, to me, made me feel confident that if it could be pulled off, Bob could do it. And now, within my leadership team, Mark Geyer, my deputy, and I, and Steve Cook, the deputy or the project manager for ARES, we discussed, the challenges that Bob faced, and we on a periodic basis, and kept each other informed on our independent assessments of how the 1X effort was coming together. And over the months, it was a process of being increasingly satisfied with the conversations, the approach, the methodologies used, the collaborative environment, the decision, the crispness of decision authority. Which, and I'll say, this was basically primarily a test of the rocket, the concept of the rocket, and it's a testimonial to the ARES team that they were able to, because they understood they had to keep going with ARES 1's formulation activities, to be able to support 1X, but yet let go enough to allow the 1X team to move and be successful as a testimonial to their professionalism. So I was very happy with how that all played out. It was fast track. By fast track, we mean it was all about schedule. It was about getting the primary objectives done and getting it done as close to the target date as possible. Because every week that went by, every month that went by, was additional cost to the program. The original cost estimate, when we originally scoped ARES 1X, was something on the order of $400 million, and we were going to do it by April 15th of 2009. We came within 10% of it on cost, which in this business is knocking it out of the park. So Bob and his team can be very proud of that. And we came within 6 months on schedule. And so what it showed us from a project management perspective is that a lean team that is focused on schedule. We got to make decisions to keep the schedule. Got to keep it moving. We can't dither and get into analysis paralysis and all of this other thing. It means that the senior leaders on the team need to make tough choices, and they're not going to have a warm tummy feeling on every choice that they make. We did tailor things, but we were tailoring, quote, tailoring requirements and standards on the mainline program. The tailoring aspect is not a big a swinger to me. I mean, if we needed to tailor something on the mainline program, we'd tailor it. We more than likely put ourselves through more pain than we needed to as an agency team. When we did want to tailor something, some NASA standard that we didn't, we wanted to modify or only apply part of, we had to go through much more extensive negotiation between the program or project side and the institutional side. But I think that's manageable, and I think an aggressive schedule actually, and the right decision process, actually that becomes a non-issue. So the sense of urgency, I think, was healthy, which was another reason I was in fact wanting to shift the program's strategy to more of a flight test centric strategy after we had the ARES 1X experience in hand. One of the things that the techniques that Bob used for upbriefing to myself and anyone higher is that he developed one standard format of project status charts that he used both internally and externally. In other words, both downward and upward, to keep his team all on the same page. Weekly, fairly quickly, I'd say within the first year, he was statusing the program weekly on what was going on, the decisions being made. Very rarely did he have to elevate a decision or come to the program for a decision or have to deal with an appeal because somebody disagreed. Those occasions were very few. In part because of the flight test, the unmanned flight test nature of ARES 1X, the risk and the communicating that we did as a management team to make sure that everybody working the effort understood we were willing to accept more risk. Not everything had to be hammered super flat, like if we were going to put people on it. We were going to move quickly and accept that there's be some perceived additional risk because of the pace. That was a constant concern. We were constantly trying to monitor the degree to which we were pushing the team. Certainly wanting them to be aggressive, but did not want them to, cross the line into folly. And so that tended to free the team a little bit to then go ahead and accept some. If I don't follow this particular NASA standard to the letter, it's, we're doing the equivalent. It's probably okay. We will, if it's not okay, it will get exposed at a later point in the process. A development program can go down two paths. It can, what we've been used to in human spaceflight is a path of doing rigorous ground testing, before we commit to a flight test. And that is the way much of the Constellation plan had been formulated. What ARES 1X showed us is that there is another strategic path that we were very at the time that the program was canceled. We were very optimistic about coming off of the success of ARES 1X. The broader team was starting to really appreciate the value of incremental flight testing and incremental buildup and capability through flight testing as an alternative means to reach certification, so to speak. To finally, at the end, after a series of flight tests, to have had enough experience with the system to be able to say that the design is certified for production. Okay. So that's one lesson learned, and one that we were embracing. The other lesson was the management organizational structure and team size suggestions that flowed out of the way that 1X was managed. 1X, if you look at the organizational structure that Bob created, was a very flat organization, basically an IPT type of construct, where he had half a dozen or more IPTs, all answering to him through a single control board decision authority. And that construct avoids a lot of what I would call fixed cost. It's whenever you have a vertically oriented organization with many levels to it, there's a tax you pay in what would be fixed cost. In other words, cost that's going to stay with you for almost the entire time. That you avoid when you have an organization that's very flat. And so what it showed us is a flat org structure. It suggested that a flatter org structure than the one that we had in the first phase of Constellation could be successful in realizing some flight test events, with each incremental flight test increasing in the fidelity of its capabilities, building up to what we've termed initial operating capability. And so that was kind of what we were setting about to do at the beginning of 2010, is go to more flight test strategy and adjust the organization, the program and the projects of the mainline program, blending those into one flatter team to move forward from that point. Not unlike what the space station program went through in its transition from Freedom to International Space Station. That kind of transition brings a lot of challenges with it, because what we were essentially trying to do was get the team smaller from that point forward. We had designs, preliminary designs, for the rocket and the spacecraft, designs well in hand for the ground systems. So now, how do we manage the effort going forward, and what did ARES 1X teach us was possible? And so those were probably the two, from a management perspective, probably the two most significant lessons learned for me and the management team around me. You have the cultures of the companies, the prime contractors, their subcontractors, their cultures. Program management is a merging of cultures to get a job done. And 10 Healthy Centers was about, blending the way business is done at Glenn and the way business is done at Johnson and Kennedy and Marshall and JPL, and it's bringing the best of those cultures to the table to enrich the job. And I witnessed that over and over again in Constellation. It was really impressive, the depth of talent and the openness, really, particularly on technical, when working technical issues, the openness of individuals from different, say, engineering cultures, like the engineering culture at JPL versus the engineering culture at Johnson. When the technical experts got together, the different perspectives enriched the answer, and I didn't see any clashes, to use the term that you opened with. I didn't see clashes in that respect. That whatever clashes we had were over probably ways of doing business, engineering standards, environmental test standards at Goddard, for example, are different than environmental standards for testing hardware at JPL. And if you think about it, well, their cultures are different because their focuses have been different. Goddard's done a lot of Earth orbiting systems. JPL has done a lot of deep space systems. They've been informed by different heritages, different histories. Johnson and Marshall had yet different experiences with environmental testing. And so part of what Constellation was about was to bring all those together and try to draw a line among them to say, okay, well, this is where we're going to start the conversation. So our engineering, when we had engineering disagreements on, in terms of cultural clashes, it was really over those kinds of things. Another culture is an engineering culture versus safety and mission assurance culture expectations. We went around a lot about specs and standards, which are really owned by safety and mission assurance. But they're owned, while the specs might be owned by safety and mission assurance, much of the data goes that is evidence of compliance with safety and mission assurance requirements goes to engineering organizations that do the assessments. And so it's and then the way that's done at Marshall is different than the way that is done at Kennedy, which is different than the way that it's done at Johnson or Glenn or Langley. Slight differences, but differences nonetheless that had to be worked out. And then you had, on ARES 1X, you had a blend of Shuttle Heritage hardware and Shuttle Heritage team members. A blend of those with flight test people that had more flight test background, such as at Langley or Dryden. Or light manufacturing at backgrounds at Glenn for flight test or test capabilities, and so those kind of cultural clashes came into bear within the IPTs and within the decision making that Bob had to deal with, where he was trying to balance, how conservative do we be with this shuttle hardware and the shuttle heritage, and this is the way we've always done it with how we process shuttle boosters, so that's the way we should do it on ARES 1X. How much of that did he have to modify, and to what extent did he get pushback culturally for that kind of thing? And he worked through all that, and it wasn't easy. But it was a commitment that we made when we agreed to fly shuttle hardware, that we needed to not be too cavalier with how it was handled, how is it processed, and so forth, because we didn't want a situation where the integrity of the space shuttle could be brought into question because of some event on ARES 1X. So we were a little careful with that. But those are the kinds of cultural issues that we dealt with, and mainly those were dealt with by Bob and his management team within the decision-making authority and construct in terms of boards and panels that he set up. I think at every milestone review, one of the questions, one of the conversations, I'll say that's the term that probably best suits it. One of the conversations senior management should have with the project manager or program manager, and that the program manager should have with his project managers and so forth, is are we organized properly for the next phase? Are we, and it became clear to me through the different phases of those 5 years that the organization had to morph with the work. Design integration, in phase B, is very different in nature than conceptual work in early phase A. So people do you have the right people? You don't always have the right seats on the right butts in the right seats on the bus forever. Some people's strengths are in the early conceptual phase, but they may not be great at realizing the hardware system. Others may be great hardware guys, but they really just hate the conceptual phase because they want to move on and get to real hardware. So you really have to be attentive to, is my org structure set up to be successful and as efficient as possible in the next phase? And that was the conversations that we had all along, including the conversation we had just before the program cancellation was announced, was what do we need to do for the next phase of the program to be successful? So those kind of overt conversations, very much I would recommend with senior management, need to happen. They can happen in a smaller group. I mean, it doesn't need to be part of a big review, but still, AAs and program managers, program directors, project managers need to be attentive to, am I organized properly? Now, measuring that really needs to address fixed cost, because fixed cost in these large-scale programs is what causes the preponderance of the cost growth on large programs, and that gets back to being zealots about schedule. You know, it's one of the things that 1X showed us. A schedule-driven effort really can be successful. But if you're gonna manage cost growth on large programs, you have to manage the schedule rigorously. It's all about schedule, just about. And so do I have the right organization? Is it as lean and flat as I can make it, given the job I have to do? And sometimes, a lot of times the organization is going to be driven by the complexity of the job. How many elements are there? How am I going to integrate them and all that? But then, have I positioned my team to be able to take on the next phase as efficiently as possible? And so I think it's appropriate to talk about that among the management team at each milestone. And we really didn't talk about or think about it in those terms. I naturally, at the end of each or near the end of each phase of Constellation, SRR, SDR, PDR, naturally had those conversations. And what do I need to do to the organization? What's not working that I need to organizationally address? And how do I make sure everybody understands their roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, authority in that next phase as the nature of the work changes? But on large programs, particularly with several hundred people distributed all over the country, several thousand people. Constellation was overall about 10,000 people, contractors and civil servants. It is incredibly. I mean, decision making is paramount. You have to have clarity in decision making. We struggled with it, and it was something that we systematically improved upon over time. But we were always somewhat chasing the most efficient thing because the nature of the work was changing. Just as we would get roles and responsibilities and accountabilities worked out, then the nature of the job, the nature of the role of systems engineering and integration relative between the program and the projects, the nature of that work would change, and we'd have to then adjust, further as we went. So, but I think overtly making it a line item that should be addressed. Is your organization set up for the next phase? Should be an exit criteria of the phase you're just leaving. What's your plan? And how are you going to get fixed costs down? Your procurements and your acquisitions. What are you doing with your primes to get fixed cost as low as reasonably possible.